Who are the best NBA offensive engines under the age of 26? Plus, should stars have to honor their contracts? And is Team USA in trouble? And if so, how much trouble? All that and more on Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On NBA, your source for all things NBA from the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for joining us and making us part of your week. Appreciate you guys being along for the ride across our variety of shows. You can catch out so many great hosts of all of our different shows here on Locked On NBA throughout the week. Make sure to like, review, subscribe. If you're following us on YouTube, where you can catch a live version of the show and record this one on Mondays for Tuesday, make sure to hit that like button and hit subscribe. Turn on notifications and you'll be able to catch the show live as well as catch new episodes whenever they're uploaded. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, make sure to give us those 5-star reviews. Helps us out so much. We appreciate you guys making us part of your day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today. My name is Matt Moore. I'm a senior NBA writer for the Action Network and co-host of Locked On Nuggets, joined by my co-host David Ramil. He is co-host of Locked On Heat. Follow him on Twitter at DRamil13. I will continue to call it Twitter until the end of time. No, you cannot make me change it. David, how was your weekend? How are you enjoying the offseason?
That's great. I'm looking forward to talking about real basketball content because there's so much going on around the NBA. We never run out of things to talk about here on Locked On NBA.
And that's why we have created this completely contrived mechanism to argue about a number of players. We'll talk about that. Plus, we're going to ask a question because David and I have kind of danced around it in different discussions, and I think it's worth having a frank, open discussion of the question of, we have so many stars asking out these days, should superstars honor their contracts? We're going to tackle that question second segment. Later on, we'll talk about Team USA, not a star-studded roster. They're not heavy favorites to win FIBA World Cup. But there's been some shakeups across the landscape in terms of the other teams and what's going on there. So we'll keep an eye on that. And we'll talk a little bit about how much trouble, if any, Team USA is in their hopes of a gold medal. But we start today with a conversation. We've been doing this series for the last couple of weeks, and I think it's been pretty interesting to kind of examine. And that is, we've taken a number of players and just tried to basically rank these guys. So instead of just like placing them in an overall, now I'm in the process of doing a top 100 for Action Network. So I'm in the very fun process of trying to discern between players. Is he the 68th or 69th best player in the NBA? And you know what, David, you can shake your head all you want, but the content sells. People like that.
Oh, I know people love it. It's just I can't find a more difficult job ranking it because there's so much changes and nuances, etc. But we'll do. It's so much easier to do like a smaller subgroup like this. Like when you're talking about engines, and I wanted to ask you this: what do you mean by the specific engines of a team? Are you specifically talking about on the offensive end? Does that discount everything they do defensively? What is the engine categorization in your view?
So I think for me, when I talk about an engine, it's if you are the primary initiator of the offense, in that you don't have to bring the ball up, but if not, then the ball instantly goes to you. And if the entire offense is built around your specific talents and built to accentuate those, and if you are most often using those talents and skills to leverage the defense, whether it's to score or create a shot for somebody else, are you that? What's interesting is that, Nikola Jokic is the primary engine of the Denver Nuggets. Usually these are guards. Usually these are ball dominant guards. Nikola Jokic is that for the Nuggets at center. What I think is interesting is like Steph Curry is maybe one of the greatest engines in the NBA, except that he's off ball. And so like everything is built to both open up opportunities for him off ball and accentuate the kind of attention that his off ball gravity draws. I think you can kind of, in my opinion, kind of argue that Draymond and Steph were together, that you needed both of them in order to really drive the engine of it. Because like, if you don't have capable passing, if you don't have like that's a really good comparison. It's a hybrid engine. If you don't have a capable passer, somebody that can see the floor, then all of Steph's movement off ball isn't as valuable. And we've seen that be like the peak of what he's capable of. So we've chosen a number of players that are younger. I tried to find guys that are within the range of like what we still consider young. And the 6 that I've kind of targeted are Luka Doncic, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Devin Booker, Donovan Mitchell, Trae Young, who I was just like, I'm going to include Trae here. He deserves to be included here, and Ja Morant. And so we're going to kind of compare those and rank how we kind of see them in terms of who's most valuable. If you're putting the ball in this person's hand and saying this person is going to be a high usage, every possession creator for you, and he's going to be your primary scorer as well as the primary initiator and creator for others, I would just ask you, like, right off the bat, like, what's the thing that you value most in this exercise?
Oh, that is a really difficult question to answer. I guess it's just, and I don't know. I don't have a clear answer because I'm just thinking about this. Like, all of them have the ball in their hands so often. They're all trying to create looks and opportunities for either themselves or others. Efficiency is a part of it, but it can't be the only part of it. Because I mean, you've got a guy like Trae. He's a great passer, etc. Turns the ball over. Luka, same way. And at the same time, like, you can't fault them for, putting the ball in other players' hands and not being able to capitalize on those opportunities. They've generated. They've done their job as the engine of their respective teams. And at the same time, it's hard to focus on one area. I guess it's just, for me, I guess the sheer ease with which they would score. I think that's the biggest factor for me, is like, which of these is the best score purely, and then secondary to that, playmakers for others as well. And I think when you're looking at the names that we've listed here, the top engine, I think, is Luka. I think he is the best of the best of that category. And that's not to discount what everybody else does too. Like, you chose some really, really good players there, all of which to have their own respective weaknesses and strengths. But as far as specific engine, that's why I asked the defensive question about whether or not that was a factor. To me, it's Luka above the rest.
Yeah, I should note that Luka is also, along with Ja, the youngest of this group at 23 years old last season. Book and Donovan Mitchell will be 27 next season, so they're entering their prime next season, I think, throughout it. Luka leads all these guys in terms of the overall advanced metrics. They all love him. What's interesting, I think, is, and he's the top scorer last season amongst all of them, averaging 32.4 points per game, which is absolutely ridiculous, along with 8 assists per game. So his raw production, I think, is greater than everybody else. So he averages the most points. Trae averages the most assists, but the combined kind of contributions from Luka are what makes it up. It's kind of interesting in that usage drags down efficiency. Right. So the more that the more possessions that you have, the more likely you're going to have missed shots, and the more likely you're going to have turnovers. And both those things kind of get dragged down. Luka's efficiency is not through the roof. It's not like he is not a crazy good shooter. In fact, I actually think that he kind of struggled in that regard. It's funny. I was doing for this top 100 thing. I just sat down and I watched all of the points that he created last year, assists, fouls, and points scored. All of his made buckets feel like automatic. Like, and they feel huge. It just feels like, oh my God, like he's killing you. And then in reality, it's like, yeah, he's a 34% 3-point shooter.
Right.
Not great. Okay. But like, it feels so much greater when you kind of watch him. I do think that just the amount of usage that he takes on, and I think that he should take less. I think it would make the offense more efficient. I do think that kind of makes him the best engine, because you can theoretically, if you were to put him into a different system where he didn't have to do as much, and maybe that's the season with the addition of Kyrie Irving for a full season and some of the changes that they've made, maybe that gets him to a point where he doesn't have to. I think if you did that, he's probably still the most effective and most efficient player. I will say that I think that there is a top tier here, which is, I think it's Luka. And I honestly think it's Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I think that's the top tier here, and I have Shai number 2. What do you think?
Oh, no, I do too. Is incredible. My only look, Oklahoma City, so tough to peg because they're kind of waffling in between what stages of their team development is, and it doesn't take anything away from his individual brilliance. But at the same time, I wonder if if they were a more star-studded team, or if they had just one more star on their team, like an experienced veteran, would that change the dynamic? And we've seen this with other teams in the past. Like, this is a very young core where he can afford to do everything that he does, and everybody kind of defers to him as the more experienced and the best player on that team. but I wonder how much that would change if it was just different roster construction. At the same time, you can't really hold that against him. Individually, he's an incredible scorer. Defensively, he's the best of the bunch too. Great playmaker, does everything so well. He's just such a really good player and so largely unheralded. I think even now people really discount what it is that he does because of Oklahoma City kind of being in this this weird, nebulous area in terms of their own team development and everything else like that. But he is just a great player. I do have him also number 2 on this list of players, and it's again maybe just by slight degrees, but he certainly I think he deserves that kind of recognition.
A lot of this is Shai was so good at attacking the rim, it made up for like a lot of his other deficiencies. But he shot 51% from the field and he shot 53% on twos. Luka shot 59% on 2-pointers. Like, he's just a tank. He's just an absolute tank. And honestly, their 3-point shooting is comparable at 34% versus 35% if you round up for Shai. It's a 0.3 differential here. So it's very low in terms of the differential between those two guys. I do think that if you put Shai in a system where he was surrounded by shooters, if you ran 5 out, he'd probably be, I think that you would see even better numbers. Look, I bet Shai Gilgeous-Alexander to win MVP next season. That's how good I think he can be.
Whoa.
I think that's how good I think he can be next season. And
that's impossible though. Like what would it take? I mean, this is a different conversation, but what would it take for him to win MVP? Like, they'd have to win a certain minimum number of games, wouldn't it, for just that kind of consideration?
You're not seeing it as much anymore. And you got to factor in the 65 games win mark or played mark too, right? So if the Thunder make an unexpected huge leap next season, and let's say that they finished ahead of Dallas. If they finished with like 49 to 51 wins, they made that kind of a leap next season, which would be huge. But they are adding a bunch of talent like Chet Holmgren, Jalen. Like, there's so much internal improvement there. If they were to make that kind of a leap, Shai's numbers were there last year. Like, that's how good he was last year. And he wound up getting on the MVP ballot. That's how good he was. So it's a matter of like, if the Thunder improve to where they are playoff competitive, then there's at least a chance on a long shot that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander could be in that discussion.
Fair enough. We'll see how it plays out.
As we kind of wrap up here, I think if we go through the last 3 names, the last 3 guys, which I think are 4 guys that I think are kind of tougher. I think Booker. I'm going to put Booker 3rd in his own tier. I want to put Donovan Mitchell there. I think Donovan Mitchell is a little bit underrated at this point. If we kind of look at all the different factors, like Donovan shot the best of all these guys from 3 at 39%. He had the best effective field goal percentage at 57%, which was considerably better than some of these other guys. But because he plays next to Garland, he only averaged 4.4 assists. And he averaged 28 per game, which is still a ton, but it's not nearly the 32 mark of Luka or 31 of Shai. It is more than the other guys. I think Donovan Mitchell is great. I think what Booker's done in the playoffs puts him at a higher level. I love Booker's ability. Like, I think Booker is an incredible passer. I think he's going to be even better this year after the experience of getting blitzed by the Nuggets. I would have Booker 3rd and then Donovan Mitchell 4th.
That sounds fair. Does that mean Trae Young or Ja Morant is last? Because I know I have Ja last on my list. Where is he on yours?
I have Trae last.
Okay.
Trae's passing, it needs to be respected. He is like the offense, the assists that he creates are not easy, and he is a really gifted passer, and he's a better passer than Ja, though Ja is pretty underrated. Ja does have an ability to dominate a game in a way that Trae doesn't. When Trae's putting up these huge point totals, it never feels like you're just like, unless you're like, I will say that playoff run, it felt like it when he was just owning the Knicks and the Sixers. But outside of that, since then, we haven't really felt like Trae Young was dominating a game. There are stretches where you're just like, Ja's making one incredible play after another. And the things that Ja needs to improve in order to get to that next level are very doable. He just needs to get more comfortable with his pull-up jumper. He can make it. He's just not comfortable taking it. He tries to get to his floater too much. As he starts to see the floor better as he gets older, I think that he'll absolutely be there. But with the way that his athleticism translates, even with all the off-court stuff, I'll take Ja Morant over Trae Young.
Okay. I to me, like, there needs to be more consistency, and I think we all get so obsessed about the incredible plays, the individual plays, and I want to see more sustained goodness, even not just greatness. There's just sustained goodness from him.
Yeah, he's a spectacular player, but he's got to work on all that other stuff, and that's pretty typical for guys of his age. Somebody did mention in the comments about Halliburton being snubbed. I think Hallie's too young to be in this conversation. I will tell you that, like, I am extremely high on Tyrese Halliburton. Like, I am unbelievably high on Tyrese Halliburton and where he sits. Like, he is way higher on my elite 100 than I think he's going to be on most people's 100 list. So he'll be in that conversation as
Is there anybody else that you kind of put in this list that maybe didn't make it aside from Halliburton? Darren Fox, perhaps? Is there somebody else along those
I think
lines?
De'Aaron probably deserves a little bit of consideration here and didn't quite make it. Jalen Brunson, I think, is another one, but Jalen doesn't have necessarily the usage that you would expect for a guy like this. That's one of the reasons I didn't include him. But it's possible that he could maybe get there. Outside of that, I don't know how many other like really dominant engine young guys there are in the league. Other than that, you start getting into some of the older guys. So I think Hallie and De'Aaron are definitely two guys that deserve to be mentioned as honorable mention. So on the other side, David and I have danced around this topic. It's time for us to have a conversation. Should superstars honor their contracts? We'll have that showdown on the other side. First, I need to tell you about FanDuel Sportsbook. Football season's about to kick off, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to win all season long. Because right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you get bonus bets every time they win in the regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you'll get bonus bets for every victory. I did this with the Chiefs last year. That was my bet. They had this bet last year, and I put it in on the Chiefs. And what do you know? Not only did I win on the Super Bowl, but I also won on every win that they cashed on their way to the over as well. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you'll get bonus bets for every victory. And you can use your bonus bets on spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. We'll be right back on Locked On NBA. Back here on Locked On NBA. Thanks for joining us and making us part of your day. I appreciate Ted showing up and being like, Trae Young? Yeah, well, look, Trae had the most assists of any of those guys. He's like second on the assist list. He is he had a down year scoring. I'm willing to give a little bit of leeway there. I understand the feeling on Trae Young. Trae Young's still very good. I try and it's easy, I think, to pick apart Trae's game. I've done it.
Sure.
But I'll also say this: I prefer Trae Young's game to LaMelo Ball's. So just go ahead.
Oh yeah,
get that out there. Yeah. All right, Davis. You and I've danced around this topic because we've done this show long enough that we've had these conversations about different stars asking out and whatever. And I think that these issues are polarizing, and most sports fans, I think, have very extreme feelings. It's either I'm sick of these stars asking out; they're paid tens of millions of dollars. You know, these teams, like, they're beloved by their fan bases and they're just chasing rings or whatever. And the other side of it is a very modern online media kind of perspective of it's a mix of things, but it's very player empowerment, pro player empowerment, very much centered around, and some of it gets into like labor disputes and the idea that this is a labor argument. I have some pretty detailed, like, you got to get nuance on some of that. But that's the large part of it is it's billionaires versus labor, right? So I'll just let's go ahead and just start here. What is your general feeling on the trend of superstar players with multiple years left on their contracts? And I don't think we need to attach this to Dame or Joel or any of these guys. I think we can just talk about it in the abstract. What is your feeling on superstars asking out despite having signed and agreed to long-term contracts?
My feeling is that as fans and as media, I think that the way we view these players evolves, and I think it changes, and the criteria, the lens through which we view them also changes over time. And as such, people change, and we expect them to be different or to meet that criteria, that ever changing. The goalposts are always moving for how we view these players. We talked about just a second ago, Trae Young. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it would have been unquestionably one of the great young stars of our league, an all-star, guiding his team to playoffs, went to deep in the Eastern Conference, etc. Now he's kind of washed up, and somehow, despite the fact that he's only 24 years old, like, he's overrated to a certain degree. So that kind of perspective is, I think, an important one. For me, I look at each case as an individual one, and I understand why these players are held to these different standards, these ever-evolving standards, and as such, why the fixed nature of a contract shouldn't necessarily be applicable. Like, we cannot have Dame under contract for 4 years, and I'll use him as an example because it has been a topic that we've talked about. We cannot hold him under a contract for 4 years under which we signed him to this contract, and he signed his contract to get paid a whole heck of a lot of money for sure, but also with the expectation that we would build a great team around him, that we would continue to compete, that we would do whatever is necessary to make changes to be great. And the Portland Trailblazers have done the opposite of that. They've traded away key players. They've erased what could have been a potential playoff run by trading away this player or that player. Maybe all just role players within a vacuum, but at the same time, contributors to winning. And they've clearly leaned into a rebuilding nature. And as such, now Dame is under that kind of expectation. Well, in order to be viewed as an all-time great, and he already is, as one of the 75 best players in NBA history, he's already viewed as all-time great. But something's missing, right? He has to be viewed as a championship winner. And I think now that has kind of been put on him as something that he needs to check off on a resume that constantly evolves, a checklist that now always kind of changes from month to month, year to year. Now all of a sudden the expectation is for him, you have to go somewhere else in order to win a title, because clearly Portland isn't going to. So I have no problem with individual players asking out of a specific team while they're under contract for a number of years. Having said all that, I think that the idea of players still having to follow their contracts is still one that obviously makes a whole heck of a lot of sense, just because of the nature of fandom, and you want to be able to root for these specific players for a number of years. You can't just have them moving around on an annual basis. It would crush the sport. Obviously, you want to be able to attach yourself to these players as a fan, as a fanatic. You want to be able to establish an emotional connection that takes time to evolve and build, like Dame has built in Portland. So I find it interesting when we're talking about this, and I know I've gone long on this, like that Portland fans, probably the most hardcore of Blazer fans, are mostly very supportive of his trade requests, because they recognize the fact that Portland isn't going to build a winner anytime soon. And as such, what they want most of all for the player that they have loved more than any other player in franchise history, that they have grown to love over the past 11 seasons, is for him to be able to be in a team that can win a championship as soon as possible, and so I find that to be very interesting when we're talking about why fans of 28 other teams outside of Miami, of course, are clamoring for, you got to adhere to contracts, you got to stick to it, you can't just ask for a trade like this. It's like, well, Miami fans certainly want Dame to come to Miami, and Portland fans by and large seem to think, well, you know what, I want Dame to go where he's going to be happy. If that's Miami, well, so be it.
I would disagree with that. My assessment is that they want him to go anywhere else because they're like, we got to get something back. And we've been over that. I think so. There's a couple of things in there I would refute. I think it's tough. I've heard this argument, which is, well, the Blazers are rebuilding. Okay. If they were rebuilding, if you're trying to rebuild, you want to emphasize your draft stock. You're willing to lose. You're actually hoping to lose so you get better draft positioning in the lottery. If that was your goal, you would trade Damian Lillard anyway. Like, you would just dump him. You'd just be like, it's over. Yep. Right. And they didn't do that. They didn't want to trade him. That's because their intent, and they definitely wouldn't have given Jeremy Grant the money that they did. Maybe. Like, if that was the position that they were moving towards, the Blazers would love nothing more than for Dame to be like, you know what, this is getting to be too much of a hassle. I changed my mind. I'm staying. And they'd be like, great, awesome. We'll repair this. We'll go forward. Their failures to build a contender around Dame are different than an intention to rebuild. Now, that doesn't mean that Dame's not it's okay. I think you're absolutely right for a guy to be like, look, I want to win a championship. When I signed the contract, you had indicated to me that you were doing everything possible to move towards that. That has not happened because of your failures, not because of your intent, right? But it just hasn't happened. You don't have to say your failures. It hasn't happened. So it's not going to happen here. We're too far away. I want out. I think that that's reasonable as long as you are willing to work with them in terms of again, I would say giving multiple options, but I think it's reasonable. I think one of the things that gets tough here is there's a difference in Dame where there's a feeling of what's owed to the player. Mm-hmm. What oftentimes I get frustrated with is these things are under player control. And that's what I think is frustrating for a lot of people. If you're just well, look, I'm going to give you, I want you to contend. And LeBron did this, right? Where he was I'm signing 1-and-1s so that you are always under pressure. You will always be under pressure to compete. And he did that in Cleveland, where it's harder to get free agents, and then sign longer term contracts with the Lakers because he knew he didn't have to, right? He knows he can get free agents there. So you have the ability when you're negotiating a contract, if you want that flexibility, you can take it. But there has to, this is my whole thing is like, you don't get to have it all. You have to be able to be like, I'm willing to sacrifice more financial security long-term for more freedom in picking a team where I know I can compete for a championship. Or you can say, I want as much money and financial freedom as possible. I want generational wealth for my kids and my kids' kids and my kids' kids' kids and my kids' 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 kids. I want that. And therefore, if that means that I'm on some bad teams, okay. But it's when we get into this conversation of trying to have it all and there's no give and take that I wind up being frustrated. And the response to that typically is the teams can trade them whenever they want. Like the teams can trade them. My response there is the players are aware of that when they sign the contract. Like that's built in. They understand that the terms of their contract are they can be dealt. If that is such an issue for them, then the players union should negotiate no trade clauses to be more prevalent and readily available as an option in these deals. The NHL has lists of teams that you can't be traded to, and most of it's built off of tax purposes. Like those things are available in sports. You have a powerful union. Negotiate that. Like it's either your responsibility to negotiate the deal that is going to best fit your priorities, both short and long term, but you have to decide those, or it's your responsibility as a member of a union to push for the navigation of those issues to prevent this other side that people want to bring up. You've agreed to the CBA, you've agreed to the system, you've agreed to the contract. And somewhere in there, I think there is an obligation to honor that. Otherwise, we're just like, are we just doing handshake deals? What are we doing here? Like, I just don't understand that mechanism. It's not, and like, I'm very much in, I guess, and where all this comes down to is I'm very much in favor of screwing over the owners. I'm not in favor of screwing over your teammates, team staff, the front office, and the coaches. It's the collateral damage in these situations that I wind up having a lot of sympathy for.
That I can understand completely. And look, I you bring up a good point, and you wonder why more players haven't had the forethought to be able to negotiate these kinds of things because they can be included, or to have like the kind of structure in play like a LeBron James. Like let's stick to Dave. Like, why do you think he chose the max money, the generational money of many years over the flexibility to say, well, I want to kind of see whether or not Portland can build this contender over the next couple of seasons?
I think at the time he really believed that he wanted to stay. I think at the time he really believed that they would get in the right direction for a number of reasons. Like they should have been better last year than they were. And that is a front office failure. I've really tried to resist this when there's been this painting that like, well, the Blazers, everyone acts like the Blazers have done nothing wrong. I'm like, no one said, like, I don't know anybody that said that. Like the Blazers screwed this up from the very beginning. I can list like 15 different things, starting with trading for Jeremy Grant, continuing through not trading Yusuf Nurkic like 3 seasons ago. There's any number of problems with how they built this team. But I think that, Dame Dame was parroting the loyalty thing about how he didn't care. And like, he was comfortable. He was saying all that, and he gets to change his mind. Like, I'm with you on that. I think it's a fair point. He gets to change his mind. I think it's difficult when we say, if you change your mind, then everything's out that, well, okay, you probably should have considered changing your mind when you signed the long-term deal. Right?
Yeah, no, I see all that, and like I can't help. I don't seem to care. I don't know. Maybe you're right. I maybe that's just a myopic view, but when it comes to a player, because I tend to gravitate towards the more humane idea of like, well, a player just wants to play somewhere else, regardless of why or that the criteria has changed. My feeling is just like, you know what? It's fine. Like I'm totally entitled to it. I feel like, or they should be totally entitled to it. Maybe it is too myopic because, as you just said, there is damage to other people, like the stadium and media members. Like, there's so many people will suffer as a result of Dame's departure that it can't just be that easy. But I don't know. There is no right answer. Like should Should we sacrifice Dame's happiness in order for more concession workers to be able to keep those part-time opportunities at the Rose Garden? Maybe. It's that is getting into the real thick and weeds of just socioeconomics in general.
Yeah, but I guess I just wind up being like, one, I've said this, like, money doesn't make you happy. The absence of money makes you unhappy. That's the thing I've been preaching to my kids. But I wind up just in the thought of, like, again, Dame chose a situation in which he became unhappy. And in a couple of years, he gets to choose a situation where he can be happier, but he'll probably make less money. There are consequences to our decisions. And I have a hard time being like, that shouldn't apply. I think there's fair points on both sides. And I appreciate having the discussion, because I just think it's an interesting conversation to have in the abstract, when too often we get into the details of player said X or did Y or team. Yeah. So I appreciate it. On the other side, is Team USA in trouble? Because the roster doesn't seem to be impressing many folks. We'll talk about Team USA's chances as well as some problems for the other teams in the World Cup. We'll do that on the other side on Locked On NBA. Back here on Locked On NBA, thanks for joining us, making us part of your day. Appreciate you guys being with us on a Tuesday. Make sure to check out John Corrales and Jake Madison tomorrow on Wednesday. On Thursday, you got Nick Angstadt and Pat the Designer. And on Fridays, you got David's co-host Wes Goldberg along with my co-host Adam Mares on Friday's edition. All right, so wrapping up here on a Tuesday. Team USA, I think no one really knows like what's going on. The select team versus Team USA, those practices have been going on. Cade Cunningham has absolutely been dominant. He declined an invitation to join the actual team, choosing to focus on the upcoming 23-24 season after he missed most of the year. But he has been apparently one of the best players on the floor in every single game. This roster, Jalen Brunson, Anthony Edwards, who's been moved into the starting position. It's got Austin Reeves, who's filling up the highlight reel, I'm sure, with charges and other those type of plays. Josh Hart and those types of things and those types of players are on the roster as well. It's an interesting kind of situation. They are not heavy favorites at the sportsbook for the first time that I can remember in a long time. When the best players are Anthony Edwards and Jalen Brunson, it's not really all that surprising. Maybe Jaren Jackson Jr. you include in that group too. What I do think is kind of interesting, David, and we talk about it in a little bit, is I do think that there's some problems with all of the other would-be contenders, and that might open the possibility of Team USA may not be dominant in this run, but they might still have enough to win gold anyway.
No, considering injury concerns across the board, and I mean the fact that some of the key teams are missing key players. Not to mention, the guy you cover in Denver, he's pretty good, and without him there, it certainly opens things up for a lot of other teams. So I don't know. I feel like we kind of do this exercise every time, and I think 1992 and 2004, 2008 have all kind of spoiled us to a huge degree. Well, 2008 anyway. 92, 2008. It's like they have to be these star-studded teams, and if they're not. We're seeing this with the U.S. women's national soccer team, right? Like they fell short in the World Cup, and now all of a sudden everybody wants to trash them. And I know there's a lot of anti-feminism in that, and just real misogyny interwoven into those kind of conversations. But I think it has something to do as well with the way that we view the men's national teams. It's like, for one, we don't really care about national team sports here in the United States for whatever reason. We don't care until maybe the Olympics turns on, and then we kind of pretend to have a little interest in it here and there. The World Cup, what the hell is that? We really don't care. Just give us the Olympics. Just give us our gold and let us worry about that. So I think that's certainly a part of it. And then we just kind of tend to, again, if they're not the superstar laden teams, it's like, well, these guys, they're going to be okay. They're not great. Why should I really care about them, the event, their chances of success or otherwise? Like we did this with the men's Olympic team last year. It wasn't the most star-studded team, and I think they were still pretty good. They won gold, right?
I can't remember.
They did win gold. Yes, they did. Bam Adebayo, gold medalist for Miami.
Oh, that's right. So
they struggled, right? They struggled early on, and everybody wanted to bury them right away. And I think we're kind of doing that. Look, this team can win gold, right? Like they're favorites. They might not be overwhelming, dominant favorites, but they're favorites to win gold, aren't they?
They are. They are favorites to win gold. They are at FanDuel. They are minus 115, which is pretty close to even here, which shows you kind of the difference. But what's interesting is we look at some of these other teams, right? So Team Canada is plus 460. Jamal Murray is not going to play in their friendlies before starting competition. They're hoping he can ramp up and make it there. Corey Joseph has already had to leave the team based off of an injury, so he is out as he prepares for the season. O'Shea Brissett, Boston Celtic, who actually is pretty good. That's another NBA player not going to be available for Team Canada. So they're starting to miss guys already from a team that looked like it had a really good chance to be maybe step up and have its finally this, because they've been talked about for so long. And then you go to 10-1, and you got Australia, who I think will have a bunch of really good players. France is probably the underrated one here at 1,200. Like, they're still going to have like Rudy Gobert, and they're still going to have enough guys that are going to be able to compete and probably be a problem. Serbia, you mentioned Nikola Jokic, not going to play. Greece, Giannis Antetokounmpo not playing. Slovenia, Vlatko Cancar suffered an ACL. He's out. That's an NBA player. He may sound like Vlatko Cancar. The margins are thin here. Like, your margin for error is small when you play a team with as many NBA players as Team USA. So there are kind of all these teams that are probably going to have more issues. Germany is a really interesting one, where I thought Germany was great last year. Like, they looked really good. It was one reason I'm so high on Franz Wagner. And they've got internal strife because Dennis Schroeder made comments about Maxi Kleber not playing through injury. So Kleber sent a letter and said he's withdrawing from Team Germany. Basically, screw that guy. I'm not welcome. I'm out. Like, Dennis Schroeder cost them Maxi Kleber. And I'm just like, the NBA drama continues in FIBA World Cup. Well, how is Dennis Schroeder somehow ruining the chances for Team Germany as well? You have all these other things. A bunch of players got cleared for Dominican Republic. So there's all these types of guys coming in, but the competition is not what it used to be. You don't have Argentina that used to be such a great team with Manu Ginobili, Fabrizio Oberto, Luis Scola, those type of guys. You don't have France isn't as dominant as it was when you had Tony Parker.
Spain.
So yeah, you have this kind of opportunity to kind of to step up and fill the gap. So maybe Team USA may not be as dominant. And one thing I am kind of sad about, though, I will say, is that typically what Team USA is it's an opportunity for the young guys to see how the greatest players work, and they all come away changed by that experience. And it's kind of a bummer that there's none of the veterans around to be that kind of example for them. That there's not like one dude that is like, yeah, sure, I'll play, to give those guys that same experience. It's a bummer that they're these guys are having to be their own leaders. That's tough when you're as inexperienced as they are, but it should be a fun team to watch nonetheless.
I like that point. I agree. Like to watch a KD or Carmelo and how they go about their work, like that's the standard that they hold themselves to as NBA players, and there isn't that one superstar at that level. So this could catalyze a team in a very positive way, and it'll be up to them to decide whether or not they want to be, whether they want to coalesce and be the kind of group that they can be. And look, I mean, I don't know. It's going to be an interesting summer for them. That's without a doubt.
By the way, including because Razorback Rock threw in, the new generations of fans these days are a lot harsher than they used to be, I think. I don't know if that's probably in regards to our earlier conversation, but Bobby Portis, also Team USA. Very excited for Bobby Portis.
That's a head shaker.
All right, that's going to wrap it up for Locked On NBA. Thanks for joining us on a Tuesday. Have yourselves a great week. Make sure to tune in tomorrow for Jake Madison and John Corrales. We'll be back next week as we'll recap the Hall of Fame, which David's going to be in attendance for. We'll talk about the legacies of all those great players going to the Hall this weekend. Enjoy your week. We'll see you guys again next time on Locked On NBA.